This is a response to the video posted on Sunday, March 8th, 2020 by the channel Midnight's Edge, titled The Collapse of Star Wars, Star Trek, and Doctor Who, and the Entitlement of the Media Complex. If you haven't watched that video, you should before watching this one, although if you have been following the major pop culture wars of the last few years, you probably know its basic arguments. Midnight's Edge is one of many channels that has been addressing the cultural shifts that have been playing themselves out through the conduit of some of the biggest elements of pop culture. I found these channels myself through the pursuit of my own similar project. Several years ago, after watching the movie Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and noting the stark split reaction among the fan community, I began writing a book to investigate what it meant. I've spent much of the last 4 years writing it, and it is now close to release. Preparing for its publication has been difficult for many reasons, one of which is that the battles taking place within these media franchises have been so quickly evolving that it seems that about every week some new development is forcing an expansion of its themes. Also, much of what I discussed in the book seems to have been prescient enough that others are also coming to many of the same conclusions that I put in it. The video by Midnight's Edge was one such example, and so, before I go any further, let me state that, contrary to what one might have initially assumed upon hearing that this is a response, I do believe that this video gets it about 90% right. We are seeing roughly the same problem, and this video goes into what I think that problem is. In doing so, however, it highlights a few places where I think their video gets it just a bit wrong. Not in overall philosophy, but in a few key details, and I believe that correcting these is necessary to come to a clearer understanding of exactly what is happening in this great cultural shift. In fact, the more I considered these points, the more I saw that I can use this retort as a microcosmic example of what I think is the right way of doing things. A small counterpoint to a single video that can be used to combine forces with it into a larger counterpoint to the entitled media masters who are picking this fight with us in the first place. And I do fully agree with Midnight's Edge and others that it is they who are the entitled ones, a point I will expand upon. The mass jeering against, followed by the mass exodus from these stories, I believe represents a clear uprising against a media oligarchy who have abused their positions over their audiences, and that their increasingly angry responses to this uprising proves it. In discussing how they get it wrong, however, the video quotes one BBC article in which the author suggests that it is not the job of Hollywood to give the audience what they want, but what they feel the audience needs. This was zeroed in on as proof of their arrogance, and their video is one already of several who have refuted this using a customer service analogy wherein someone gets something different than what they ordered. There is a valid point here, but I believe that this analogy goes one step too far in an important way, as the sentiment in that article, as conceited as it seems, actually does contain within it something true, something which needs to be understood so that we can see exactly where these people are getting it wrong. To back up my position, I refer to no less than comic book legend Alan Moore, who, in his autobiographical documentary The Mindscape of Alan Moore, states almost exactly the same idea word for word. Quote, "It is not the job of artists to give the audience what the audience want. If the audience knew what they needed, then they wouldn't be the audience, they would be the artists. It is the job of artists to give the audience what they need." End of quote. When we consider Moore's own place in pop culture history, we see evidence supporting this claim. In the mid-1980s, precisely nobody was asking for a dark, realistic comic book that would show the psychological and political complexity that was inherent to the idea of the superhero. Yet, as evidenced by the fact that his Watchmen is still to this day considered by many to be the single greatest comic book ever written, Moore clearly knew what audiences needed. The same can be said for many of Moore's other works. Looking at the idea in general, we note that one of the best compliments anyone can be given for something they've done is when someone says to them, "I didn't know I needed that." This can take the form of, for example, giving someone a back rub when they're tense, or food when they haven't eaten enough due to being overworked. In relationships, it's considered a good sign when you give your partner something that they needed but never specifically asked for. This means that the two of you have a higher communication channel open, one that doesn't use words but something else, something deeper. This phenomena can also occur in the arts. One of the best examples of this can be found in a reaction to the movie Batman Begins, which has been roundly cited as one of the most important superhero films ever in terms of how it changed the direction of the art form and brought us to this moment of superhero supremacy. Roger Ebert gave the film 4 stars, something he did for no other previous Batman film. Closing his review, Ebert stated, quote, "I said this is the Batman movie I've been waiting for. More correctly, this is the movie I did not realize I was waiting for, because I didn't realize that more emphasis on story and character, and less emphasis on high-tech action was just what was needed. The movie works dramatically in addition to being an entertainment. There's something to it." End of quote. We can thus see that what this sentiment expresses is the idea that a true artist understands the psychology of his audience well enough to know that there is something that they are yearning for that they are not aware of until someone shows it to them, and then does so in a way that seals the connection between artist and audience. This is something that as a society we should always be supporting, as there is nothing that moves human civilization forward like true artistic vision. Understanding this, then, we return to the controversial fiction that raised this topic and ask the key question. Why is it that people like Alan Moore and Christopher Nolan can tap into this idea to create beauty, and most of the modern entertainment elite only partisan ugliness? I believe the answer to this question is quite simple. This approach can only work if the artist knows their audience, and the people in charge of these media not only don't know them, but probably don't even want to know them. This is where we must introduce the political angle of these messages, and the messengers sending them. That Hollywood leans extremely left is well known and never really disputed, but has rarely been bragged about as loudly as it has lately. This by itself doesn't have to be a problem because the political dispositions of the creators of a work of fiction need not necessarily alienate their audiences. After all, every artist has their own political opinions. But not every artist requires you to agree with their opinions in order to enjoy their art, even if what they produce has undeniable political undertones to it. Some of the most revered and influential movies of all time have included clear political motifs that, nonetheless, have allowed for multiple reasonable interpretations. What these films do is not shove a message down the audience's throats, but simply tell a story so well that people can read their own views into it in ways that are consistent with the film's underlying idea. To do this only requires that the filmmakers have respect for their audience, and it has become abundantly clear that, on the whole, the modern mavens of the entertainment industry just don't. They openly disdain the very people that they are trying to squeeze money out of, and it's mainly due to their belief that their politics are so flawless, so beyond reproach, that anybody who disagrees with them is beneath them and worthy of nothing more than their abject contempt. The recent outbursts against supporters of Donald Trump only prove what many of us have known to be lying under the surface the whole time. This is why their art fails, because they don't actually know what their audience needs. They've spent years demonizing people who don't think like them and doing everything in their power to not know them or their needs. They've constructed a straw man in their mind of the people they consider to be the enemy, and then wonder why the boogeyman they invented doesn't want to pay to be berated. I should add as an important personal note that I haven't voted in decades, so I am not and cannot rationally be called a Trump supporter. But maybe even more so because of my somewhat neutral position, I am able to objectively recognize what is happening and call out bad behavior when I see it. Movies may be business, but they are also art, and all art involves a conversation between the artist and the audience. The metaphors used to compare this to, say, a restaurant miss slightly because the relationship between producer and consumer in that case is different. It might be better to step back a bit and recognize that every human relationship carries with it a specific set of expectations. When you order food, you do indeed want it to be exactly as it is pictured or described. This is not quite the case with a film or TV show, since part of the joy of watching them is not knowing exactly what you're going to see. After all, if what you wanted was exactly the same as some previous film, you would just watch that one instead. There has to be some originality, some new thought put into it. The question is, how much? What are the audience's expectations? And does the work either meet them, or, if it subverts them somehow, is it done in a way that is respectful of the time and money that the audience is choosing to give to the artist, given what we know about what brought them there in the first place? One place we can see this idea in action is the concert. There are certain fan-favorite songs that the audience always wants, and the musician will almost always play them, if they're not sick of them. But they'll also include some obscure songs, maybe an unreleased song or two, perhaps a few covers, and if you're really lucky, a surprise guest or two. How much of each of these you get is dependent on the individual artist, but it's mostly agreed that there exists a balance between them, and the goal of the artist is to know his audience well enough to find it. That is the crux of the problem here. For this to work, there needs to be a positive relationship between the artist and audience. If that is the case, then it virtually doesn't matter what the relationship is as long as both parties honor it. Returning to cinema, one perhaps overlooked example of this can be found in the films of Michael Bay. He has long been mocked for the simplistic nature of his films, but he doesn't care, because he is aware of the relationship between him and his target audience and is just fine with it. Responding to criticism of his films, Bay has simply stated, quote, "I make movies for teenage boys. Oh dear, what a crime." End of quote. And of course, it's no crime at all. Bay is conscious of the relationship that he has with his audience, respects it, and plays by its rules. For all of the derision that he gets, this actually puts his films above the recent franchise revisionisms. There is no positive relationship anymore, just two groups of people screaming at each other through the fictional characters that we once all enjoyed together as kids. Remember that? Footnote. While I wish that I could give a shout out to every video that helped inform and inspire this one in particular made this point in a way that I can't improve upon. For a beautiful analysis of what is going on in these cultural tug-of-wars, see the Critical Drinkers video, The Timeless Children, The End of Doctor Who, which, if a bit necessarily crude, opens with a metaphor that captures the tragic nature of these battles masterfully. Whenever any art fails, like in all communication, there is always the possibility that either party is at fault for it. A responsible artist should listen to and take seriously all criticism of their work, and consider that maybe it's because of something they are doing wrong. Now, this isn't always the case. Cinematic history is filled with movies that were way ahead of their time, that had an idea so brilliant that it took audiences a while to catch up. But it's usually a long conversation to figure out whether this is the case, and because of this, no artist should automatically assume that the audience is simply ignorant, and should instead be open to the idea that maybe the error is on their end. In other words, the unaddressed possibility here is that maybe the people who have things they need to hear aren't the people taking in these films, but the people making them. Maybe they are the ones who don't know what they need. The question is, though, are they willing to even consider this possibility? So far, their public statements in response to the crashing reception of their work don't give much hope of this. But to see that the evidence for their lack of self-reflection was already there, we need only look back to the recent presidential election that so keeps many of these people up at night. The American left, meaning again the political movement that has all but smothered Hollywood, has in years since their defeat generated an endless list of excuses for why they lost the 2016 United States presidential election. Russians, racism, Russians, sexism, Russians some more, and when those explanations fall flat, the stupidity of the masses who just couldn't recognize what a terrible choice they made. And then Russians again. They blame everything and everyone but themselves. As a result, these types have done just about everything since the election of Donald Trump to resist him, except for the one thing that is the only right response to losing an election. Talk to the people who think differently from you, understand their concerns, and do your best to try to meet them. This idea is what our entire electoral system is founded on, that everyone's concerns are important, not just some demographic subset of society. But they refuse to do this, because they truly see anyone who doesn't think like them as beneath them, as not even worthy of this much respect, even in regards to participation in an electoral system in which we are all supposed to be equals with an equal say. Something very important I should say before I continue. The internet of hate overflows every single day with countless posts and videos of people yelling at each other over every conceivable topic, and
somewhat in that tradition. This video speaks in broad strokes about people whom I've never met. So, it's very important, before I go any further, to state openly that I could be wrong. Even if other people are okay with doing so, I don't pretend to know what's in the hearts of anyone but myself and those who have opened themselves up to me personally. So, if I'm wrong, show me. Let's talk it out. I would very much like to be wrong. I am not afraid of respectful conversation about anything with anyone. Talking out problems is what I believe in, and so if I'm making a video such as this, it's simply because the people who I'm making it about seem to not want this conversation to happen. Which is why cancel culture is a thing and censorship on the internet is rampant. The option of open conversation is mostly being cut off, and so I simply have no option left but to pass summary judgment on the people who I think are causing these problems. Problems which cannot wait any longer to be addressed.
Getting back to the idea of the inequality inherent in the current artist-audience relationship. A small expansion of the restaurant analogy can help show this, as there is one place where the customer does not get to pick their meals. At home. "This is not a restaurant," goes the refrain. Now, even here, though, right from the start of a child's life, there is usually a sense of compromise, one in which they communicate with us what they do and don't like, and then the parents meet them somewhere in the middle. This analogy fits a bit better because the reaction of the Hollywood executives and well-paid media defending these shows and movies shows that this is what they think of their audiences. They treat them like children who need the grown-ups to tell them the right way to think. I think this is a more accurate metaphor. This is not art. It is a finger wagging that we are somehow expected to pay for.
So, the only answer is to say directly to these people, as I am doing now, no, actually, we don't need any more of your condescending lectures. As far as we're concerned, the ones who need to be doing the listening now are you. We've heard your message. You need to hear ours now. It's our turn to speak.
When Alan Moore made his similar statement, he could back it up by showing that he had repeatedly known exactly what his audiences needed. For him, it was an explanation of his success, not an excuse for his failure. The claim of knowing what your audiences need more than they do is a mighty high one, let's be clear, and so if someone is going to sing it, they need to bring it. And these people just can't. So now, the only question is whether they are going to consciously recognize this fact and start listening to new voices. To show a counterexample now of how to do this right, let us complete the circle and return to the video by Midnight's Edge. In this video, they speak from their perspective as the audience. However, in making this video, they are now the artist with their own audience. They clearly lay out their case with the art they are judging in a way that lets others respond. In turn, I'm the audience for their art, and my goal in putting together this video was to do the same, provide audience feedback by producing my own art. In turn, the comments section of this video is open to others to give feedback, and maybe someone else will make a response video for this as well. This is how communication works. We have an open conversation, exchanging ideas back and forth, treating each other with respect, and in doing so, we strengthen our positions. And I have great respect for the people who put the time and energy into creating channels like this, whose purpose is nothing but education of anyone who will listen, and in turn, I do my best to return the favor. This is a positive artist-audience relationship, one which recognizes that we go back and forth between both roles repeatedly. Our common focus of criticism are the people who have stopped doing that, thinking that they only have the role anymore of speaking, and never, ever listening. The enemy, if I have to put it to a single word, is elitism itself. This all ties into the charge of entitlement, which media brass and fans have now started tossing back and forth at each other in these arguments. Yet, it's easy to see that it's the fans that are right in this exchange. All that we have to do is take the term literally in a legal sense. Entitlement is the granting of a title, which has to be done by some agency. The people who are literally entitled are the people who hold the intellectual property claims for these characters. This is a position that fans are not legally allowed to breach. If it weren't for this, I could just sell, say, my own Batman movies or Thor comics. Everyone involved in the creation of many of these characters are long dead, and yet somehow there exists a bolted gate on anyone but a few making new stories about them, which completely goes against the original rationale for copyright law. This is, to say the least, not how storytelling used to be, and speaks to the extreme negative influence of capital on the arts. It is also why the anger at the people screwing up these characters is justified, because in doing so they are abusing a legally enforced monopoly. Fandoms simply have no other option other than to complain publicly and walk away. Having said all this, however, I think it's necessary to say that I don't see the problem as completely one-sided. Virtually no problem ever is. I read the article posted in the video by Midnight's Edge, and have to admit that I didn't think it was as bad as it was described. Admittedly, this could just be because I'm so used to Hollywood's leftist BS that I just filter it out anymore. It almost wouldn't be an article from a mainstream media news source without a bogus accusation of misogyny or some other form of social intolerance. However, there is a point that does need to be accepted, and that is that, even though the bulk of the problem in this picture is coming from the entertainment industry elite, fandom can also go too far. As one example, there is never any justification for death threats to anyone in the entertainment industry, no matter how awful their products, and yet we see this all the time. These are still just fictional characters, nothing more. One of the remedies that I believe we must pursue is the self-policing of our communities to one of higher standards. If we are going to speak of the respect we want, we need to lead by example. Fan bases are essential to any fictional work, but they aren't perfect, and we need to recognize that an artist is right to forge ahead with their vision if they believe in it enough to think that the audience will truly appreciate them for their efforts. They just need to be ready to accept the backlash if their vision fails. Nonetheless, if snobbish artists who look down on their audiences is one dangerous extreme to avoid, a uniform rule of art by democracy is its equally dangerous opposite. Let me also acknowledge that the error which I identify in Midnight Edge's video they come close to rectifying at the end, saying that they still want artistically challenging films. But they then just miss by undercutting this argument and stating that these more experimental approaches should be used on less established franchises, and then undercut that argument by showing a still from the movie Joker, a character who is about as established as they get, and whose recent somewhat divergent take on this character was wildly applauded. Established properties can be tweaked, even revolutionized, and again, sometimes that is exactly what they need. What it all comes down to is simply treating the fans and the characters that they have entrusted to you with respect. As long as this rule is maintained, the output will always at least tend towards something that can move us forward, artistically, socially, and when it's appropriate, even politically. I believe that this is a unifying rule that all of us who are consuming these fictions and fighting these damaging trends in them can agree upon. If you like this video, then you know what little buttons to hit, and I really hope you do, as I plan on finally making active this mostly dormant channel, including explaining what the purpose of it is. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comment section what you think. Thank you to everyone for the fantastic work they've done on their own channels to help inspire this one, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care.